corporation as a model of institutional reality, along with the question mark, are not quite on point, since the word model belongs to a different register, one that I'm not going to deal with today. Let me briefly explain my intent. The background for this is that I'm trying to write a book called What is Institution, and initiate a larger project about the histories of institutional action and institutional building. I'm particularly interested in the role of violence and of war in these histories. As part of that project, the question of the corporation is certainly one of the most basic. But I'm interested not only in how the functions and meanings of the institution and corporation overlap, how they cleave to or away from one another, as in Searle's writings, where discussing the institution implies writing about the corporation. Above all, however, I am interested in understanding and explaining a banal sentence uttered today, now, by many people who speak English and want to survive and work with the others. The sentence, of course, is different in other languages, but it is repeated by speakers of other languages with the same intentions. I quote, "If you are planning to start your own business, you should know how to incorporate. You should know how to incorporate." As the director of one institution, this institution, that has a plaque outside its offices, a mailing address, etc., I ought not utter the first part of this sentence if you are planning to start your own business. But does the second part, how to incorporate, have anything to do with the institution? More interesting, I think, than enumerating all the differences between the institution and corporation, or company. Company is a continental name for the same Anglo-Saxon corporation name, and the usual disdain towards the corporation as an emblem and essence of capitalism would be to insist on a set of various operations or cooperations that come along with a claim made by person X about the necessity of possessing a certain kind of knowledge as the basis of ultimately producing profit and sustaining that profit or company. A company, a partnership, a société anonyme, a corporation, has to be registered, to be set in the register, to be incorporated according to rules that are set by the state, generally simple, and that should be familiar. You should know. X is the first person, an institutional person, not just a subject or agent. This is my paraphrase of Petar, that the personal point of view is the condition for institutional design. The personal I quote, "The personal point of view must have this indexical first personal character," in book groups with minds of their own. X has certain interests and is surrounded by others with whom it wishes to work and who share that interest. Right away we encounter the representative of this group, which will quickly lead us to Hegel and the problem of interest representation or identity representation. In that case, the unit or group will be incorporated in the action of a certain individual portion of the whole that represents, because it considers itself identical to the whole. Further, this is neither a group of thieves, nor criminals, nor undocumented workers, since the group is ready to publicly declare its work. That is the difference between the criminals or undocumented workers, because the group which want to incorporate is ready to publicly declare its work through public declarations. Of course, it remains to be seen whether the institutional structure allows the group to make certain public declarations, or on the contrary, the public declarations institutionally design the group. X can also be single, in which case we are speaking of a corporation soul, a legal entity consisting of a single soul, incorporated office, occupied by a single man or woman. However, in that case, what has been abandoned is, in Searle's words, one of the main discoveries of contemporary capitalism, that is limited liability. That means if you have a corporation soul, you have a limited liability. Thus, corporation soul is characterized by unlimited liability, meaning that if you have business debts, personal assets would be used to pay them off. Further still, plan to start your own business implies constituting a new dynamic entity capable of competing with other entities, fighting for profit, expanding and developing. Finally, to incorporate, which all the theological and above all Christian connotations of the term, de facto represents a certain documentation procedure or writing act or acts. In these last two operations, certain real, living people exist and transform through a given procedure. When I say living people, that means corporations are at least as real as people. It's a quotation, Jan Dejnoška, corporate entity. Corporate are at least as real as people, or corporation is real because it is an artifact whose constituents typically include real people as well as real assets, as well as intangibles such as credit and goodwill. Exist and transform through a given procedure, one of documents that is objective, into a completely new entity or new form in order to more simply, quickly and safely achieve certain goals. Gather new people, money, property, reserves, funds, only to redistribute them again. Since to have, what does it mean, property? To have always also means to distribute, to change that which is. It is precisely these last two operations that introduce the word reality or realism. Paradoxically, the question of the real existence of this new incorporated entity or corporation cannot be separated from the real existence of a group that has just been constituted and united by incorporating and is now together on paper, registered, incorporated on paper. Yeah? Before I give my reasons to hold together the three words in the title of my paper, that realism is or presupposes or assumes a connection between institution and corporation, I can say from the start that I am interested in money and profit, or more precisely, amount of money or profit, or even better, amount as such, as the integrative element or factor of a community, as well as one of the main attributes of realism. Allow me to begin with a case that is as trivial as it is common, and that you have doubtlessly encountered many times. About a year ago, a professor from the University of Irvine in California, expert in collective intentionality and social ontology, was out to dinner in Milano with a couple of friends. Immediately before we were to order food, hesitating over the menu, she asked me discreetly who was paying for the dinner. It was important to establish the fact that neither she nor I was paying for the dinner in Milano, nor that our hosts were paying personally out of their own pockets before the food was ordered. This brings up a simple question then: why do we eat with considerably less pressure and more freedom at someone else's cost? I imagine that the University of Torino, which is in the end paying for this expensive dinner in Milano, is a corporation, and not just an institution, but a corporation, whereby one of the simpler definitions of a corporation could be, quote, a collection this is a corporation, a collection of many individuals united into one body under special denomination and authorized by law to act as a unit. Two of its representatives were there, and two others were participating in an event organized by the very same university whose theme was also realism. And let us assume that the intentions of the four philosophers quickly harmonize around the fact that they should order, eat, and drink more than ordinary, since it is ultimately free, as it is paid by someone seeming insufficiently existent, someone without soul and body. This is the Innocent IV Pope definition of universitas. Universitas is the Latin name for the corporation. Universitas not habet corpus, nec animam est res inanimata. Someone fictional, etc. The professor in question, from Irvine, at one point marvels that the University of Torino has a significant budget or fund. But who at all is the university in Torino? What is the status of the institutional person or corporative person of the university? This then very nearly contains all the elements of a concrete and living real theater. These four kings of reality. Reality Kings is a name of famous corporation for the production and distribution of porno films, and the status of the real, that means visible, evident, is the essence of the metaphysics of porn, truly eat together and in great quantities, destroying something and incorporating it into something else. The body grows, belies bloat, and in time expand, incorporating food. They characterize and grow along with, con crescere, grow and develop together is the etymology of the word concrete. All of this is simple proof that something real is happening in the restaurant in Milan. Further, someone is paying for dinner, the restaurant will send the university a bill, or one of the hosts will pay and be reimbursed at a later date by the university. Without money, it would be truly impossible to spend 2.5 hours in the restaurant of Milano or talking here and now about the institution. Finally, the restaurant in Milano, an establishment registered as a partnership, for example, the University of Torino, an institution, organization or corporation or company, registered or incorporated Italian banks through which one pays, etc., are, for instance, three sites among which certain documents, receipts, copies, contracts, and charters flow. These documents, then issued and controlled by certain departments or agency of the state, ensure the reality and duration of these organizations. It seems to me that it's above all the number of people, money, documents, institutions, food, enjoyment, as well as the level of responsibility for the expenditure of, or crisis or bankruptcy that determines the power or degree of realism here in play. I suggest that the concept of amount and number regulate the status of the real, and admit that this is one of two reasons why I place the word corporation, a specific kind of institution that immediately represents business, earnings, profit, and expansions in the title. For something to be real, real is like, this quote, real is like good, a dimension word. This is Austin, Sense and Sensibilia. Let me offer a reminder that in his 59 lectures, Austin designates the little first, the little word real, first as a normal word, and then claims that real is not a normal word at all. It must exist in time for something to be real and in process of realization. Among the many characteristics and themes initiated by the corporation, certainly one of the more significant human inventions, some of the most important are the protection of the rights of the individual, limited liability, and corporate responsibility. The sentence, for example, I didn't do it, the company did, belongs to this protocol, as well as the relation between corporate and canonical law, the partnership and corporation, and not least that decades along resistance and critical and hypocritical stances toward the corporation as a foundation of capitalism. However, the principal reason why I introduced the corporation is, of course, the status of the real, or the status of real or realism, immediately brought into question when this judicial hallucination is mentioned. In other words, could the corporation or the company be a good instrument for the reconstruction of our concept of reality, and then all the alternative terms that have always stood side by side with the term real? Term real, like effective, actual, concrete, evident, objective, material, physical, factual, etc. How do we harmonize the corporation or the institution with the first portion of Russell's famous phrase from the title of the lecture held in French on 23 March 1911 in the Association of Philosophers of France, Le Réalisme Analytique? Russell explains first what is analytical and what is realist. Philosophy, to which I belong, it's a quote, is analytical only in second place because it believes that we ought to search for simple elements that make up the more complex ones, and the complex things presuppose simple ones, while simple things do not presuppose complex ones. Philosophy, I belong to it, too, is realist because it does not consider existence to be dependent on consciousness. Before I mention a few details from Searle's analysis of the corporation from 2010, let me briefly construct a connection between realism and the institution using a phrase by Robert Gravestein, institutional realism. Institutions, I quote, represent, in a sense, our connectedness. Institutions are physical wholes composed of human parts. Institutional realism is supposed to oppose new institutionalism as yet another extreme form of conventionalism, as well as anti-realist philosophy of social science. I quote, "Realism assures us that those reciprocal influences which we are then in position to attribute to institutions and participants are physically realized in ways that, in principle, are comprehensible to science. As aggregates of human beings, institutions are unproblematically entities determined by their participants. As distinct physical entities, institutions can be distinct social forces." It is this link between the institution and realism that ought to affirm three circular moments that I intend to defend, and which are key to a small theory of the institution that I'm trying to formulate. First, to register or to be incorporated by way of charter or document means to be real, or more generally, to exist. Second, even before the incorporation that assumes making a new person or new body, public and official, along with others, that means transforming oneself into something else along with others, transforming oneself into something else along with others, there is a multitude of relations and they are social facts, which is why the corporation or institution will be real. In a sense, that is a reformulation of the so-called reality theory defended by Otto von Guercke. I quote, reality theory recognizes corporations to be pre-legal existing sociological persons. Law cannot create its subjects. It only determines which societal facts are in conformity with its requirements. The law only recognized the corporation. It did not create it, regardless of the fact that von Guercke, in book Das Deutsche Genossenschaftsrecht, differentiates the corporation from the institution like a Anstalt, not a Stiftung, Einrichtung, etc., Anstalt. Collective personality is, according to him, not a fictitious person, but rather a real existence, eine reale Existenz. Here is a passage explaining more clearly the corporation and the institution, the difference between corporation and institution, quite in line with von Goethe in one small quote, the Peterim Sorokin. Peterim Sorokin writes, since the Roman law, two main forms of the juridical personality have been distinguished. First, corporations, universitas personarum, or the medieval collegia personalia, where the union of the members are as persons is stressed, where the union of the members as person is stressed, such as most of various corporations, incorporated society, firms, etc. And on the other side, institutions, universitas bonorum, or the medieval collegia realia, as a complex of property with a specific purpose endowed by the law to act as a single person, such as various universities, asylums, etc., etc. Third, that written document or a written act, written declaration or charter, constitutes or institutionalizes a group or collective and protects its existence in time. Document protects its existence in time. Thus, the institution is always preceded by certain less developed institutional forms. That's the problem for Searle. Thus, the institution is always preceded by certain less developed institutional forms. There is no institution without institution behind. Consciously, we could here use Searle's term institutional background. Yes and not. I'm not sure, but... And although the three steps cannot be discretely pulled apart, just as it is impossible to begin somewhere or take the first step, there is no first, there is only the next step in a process of foundation of institution. The circularity cannot hide the importance of the multitude of documents, of writing, of letters of paper, etc. Nor can it hide the fact that several individuals or several groups of individuals coordinate their goal together and are in a process of cooperation always complicated and problematic, that these individuals intend to register together and temporality became real. That means realized in a new and unique form. This new form is above all simpler, less expensive and safer. That's why it's necessary to incorporate it. On the other hand, the idea of circularity protects me from certain other elements which in Searle's theory of institution and corporation, for example, play a role. For example, the advantage of speech over writing and the absence of or hesitation of the introduction of the document, and the document is not an object for Searle. For Searle thanks Barry Smith for the topic of corporation in the 2005 text, What is an Institution? It is in this text that Searle mentions official documentation for the first time and connects the corporation with writing language. In the book Making the Social World, Searle speaks considerably more about special role of writing, written speech act or written constitutive rules, but not in the chapter that deals with the corporation. He talks about the corporation in the chapter dedicated to creating institutional acts, whereas creating a corporation is so-called complex case. The importance of power means, in Searle, absence or hesitation in the introduction of the document, the importance of power and its ultimate example, the state, like the institution above all institutions, which always has the first and last word in registering a corporation. The collective is secondary, and Searle displays carelessness when saying that acceptance of others is a necessary condition of creating deontic powers. Thus, Searle does not exclude the possibility of one-man corporation soul, and finally, Searle's understanding of the physical object is too obscure and points latently to his anti-realism. Having here mentioned the document, let me immediately insist on the material, the paper, ink, the body of the text, or if you will, the sound, the phoneme, the materiality of the symbol, the body of the making it, an insight for which we do not need Saussure or Derrida, rather any Stoic is enough, for example, Vitruvius. Namely, between, on the one hand, the virtual reality of the law or certain rules, and on the other hand, various statements often read or uttered by rabbi, priest, lawyers, officials, or stewardess, or else a money bill, property, marriage, or a declaration of the type, "This is my house," that is, between these two realities, there is so-called written record. This is the charter which creates a legal person or corporation, a decision of the governor to issue bills of this specific design, a record, a birth certificate, marriage license, lease, contract, proof of ownership, etc. I do not have to declare, "This is my house," nor say, "I'm married to Hannah," to only then create the right to the house, because the right only exists by collective acceptance. It's a quote. The possibility to document what I say when I say that this is my house, to show my papers, my ID, driver's license, to demand that the lawyer show me the article in the law that allows the creation of a corporation, or the employer the decision based on which I am being let go, is paramount for the creation of institutional reality. But not sufficient. The sentence, "Our marriage exists only on paper." I'm not sure whether this sentence works very well in English or in French, but that is what it would be in German or in Serbian. Fine. Huh? That means our marriage exists only on paper, means that our current relationship is not harmonized by the contract we signed, and that our marriage is not worth the paper it is written on. One of the main characteristics of the institution which Hume differentiates it from and opposes to the contract, to the law, in Hume you have that difference, Deleuze, after souligner the difference between contract and institution. Apart from that, the institution, unlike the contract, supposes the existence of a third party, that is the possibility that someone else join, a sense in which the institution implicitly counts everyone in, excludes no one, and ultimately assumes that there is nothing outside the institution, and that the institution is coercive because it is formed by various transformations of violence and force, is its artificial nature, as well as the possibility of incorporating law into a group of, or tying a collective together. The fact that the paper, the marriage certificate, as a document, is not a strong enough glue to keep a couple in love, after all, neither is the once upon a time performed ceremony in which we promised to have and to hold one another, does not exclude the institutional fact that our marriage still exists. Do we have a real marriage or a factual marriage because we are not divorced, or is the document the source of reality and then the institution? In other words, does the document institutionalize, or are we in fact really separated, we could say organically separated and together on paper only? Institution is real if and only if it can be documented. That is, to institutionalize, I choose the verb, means in fact to publish or further attach documents. A synonym for documentum, or its prototype, is instrumentum. Document, that means a statement made publicly, or in the presence of a few witnesses. In a different context, documentation is nothing other than argumentation, that the institution becomes an institution if it is constantly in the process of institutionalizing or documenting. To defend this option, it seems necessary to me show that a greater transfer or distribution of paper, documents between partners certainly makes the marriage not only on paper. The more invoices, bills, receipts, tax declarations, etc., put simply, the more documents, the more love. The document amount, various transactions and contracts within the corporation and institution truly surpasses the importance of the fact of the founding of the corporation. corporation in Searle executing and filing articles of incorporation or filing a legislation document with the state officer, and places the lesser importance on the function of the state and in general the medieval institution of creating a corporation. Fiat doctrine, something that especially interests Searle. If we plot the role of the state in founding corporations, or institutions in general, through history, we can notice that only in certain very rare periods of colonialism, for example, does the state found and control, meaning gives the privilege to incorporate to certain powerful groups. For that reason, it seems to me that even a moderate institutional realism necessarily assumes an ontological egalitarianism, completely lacking in Searle. Ontological egalitarianism, that means, it's a quote from Grestein, that, quote, relational descriptions tying objects together, for example, son of, slave of, president of, votes for, interrogates are not, according to ontological egalitarianism, ontologically superior to other collections of objects. Let us, at the end, return to the hunt for physical object as a latent anti-realism. This is the quote from Searle, text, What is Institution? He, Barry Smith, pointed out that there are some institutions that have what he calls freestanding wide terms, where you can have a status function but without any physical object on which the status function is imposed. A fascinating case is corporations. The laws of incorporation in a state such as California enable a status function to be constructed, so to speak, out of thin air. Thus, by a kind of performative declaration, the corporation comes into existence, but there need be no physical object which is the corporation. But there need be no physical object which is the corporation. The corporation has to have a mailing address and a list of officers and stockholders and so on, but it does not have to be a physical object. This is a case where following the appropriate procedures counts as the creation of corporation, and where the corporation, once created, continues to exist, but there is no person or physical object which becomes the corporation. New status functions are created among people as officers of the corporation, stockholders, and so on. There is indeed a corporation as Y, but there is no person or physical object X that counts as Y. Quote again, so, but there is no person or physical object which becomes the corporation. It seems to me that unnecessarily easy and complicated at once to show the shift in understanding of the phrase physical object in our day and age. It is necessary to prove the physical existence of an SMS, deposit, bank account, electronic signature, the displayed plaque of a company, which even if it did not exist at the address of the building where Company X is registered, would still be paid for by Company X, lest as fine be levied against them, the existence of telephone calls among the signatories of the charter, etc. The physical object is never singular, as in Searle. On the contrary, when it is in fact singular, the object cannot be found, making Searle and Jacques Lacan perfectly compatible. Let me extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for taking the time to come to Belgrade and discuss the institution. Also allow me to mention one more recent event, this one also filed with banality, much as the one earlier in the paper, especially since it was not too difficult to surmise the identity of the professor from Irvine. I'm one of the founders of the Institute for Advanced Studies for Southeast Europe, which will have its seat in Rijeka and Belgrade. It is a rather large institution with annual budget of some €1 million. The institution is not yet registered, but it is there. It exists, and in the heads of some of those present, on paper, in drafts, and certainly hundreds of people are engaged and incorporated in its project and charter, along with the President of the Republic of Croatia, or First Minister here. The institution is there, and yet not there or here. The institution, the various power relations precede the institution, which is to be inaugurated, for example, in March 2030. Money is needed, and the head of one foundation, Erste Stiftung, who financed this, between the others, this small colloquium, who constantly, that head of the foundation, who constantly insists on visibility and has been for the last few weeks promising me money in the form of grant, naturally on condition that the institution is a physical object and visible even before it becomes an institution, and excited as I am and wishing that the institute become reality as soon as possible to pass, his word, to pass, he says, words, to pass from, he says, words into deeds, from paper onto money, and then from money into words, and then further onto dinner together. Thank you once again, and I wish you a pleasant dinner, certainly an institutional, incorporated dinner.
Thank you very much.